Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest from our Global Insight series, where we delve into the worlds of leading professionals from the areas of football and sport. And we ask, how did you get to where you are now? What were the challenges that you faced along the way? And what advice would you give to those who hope to follow in your footsteps? I'm Mark Clemmit, and one of the great joys of my job as a broadcaster for BBC Radio and Television and an event host, including working with UCFB and their sister organisation, the Global Institute of Sport, is I get to hear people's stories. And today's is from the world of sport media and journalism and is with an absolute icon as we welcome Sky Sports legend, Jeff Stelling. So here's the thing, Jeff. I was looking around before we started this, and I found a lovely description of you from The Guardian, and they said, exceptional professionalism and elan. Before I ask you whether that's accurate, do you know what elan means?
Yeah, after a fashion. I'm an educated boy, you know, Clemmit. I may come from a council house background and the such like, but, you know, my dad had plenty of elan as well, so maybe I've got it from him.
So how much has holding down a career for as long as you have come down to professional industry expertise, the personality, that kind of bon vivant, the ability to inspire, to entertain, personality?
Yeah, well, look, it's a combination of things, Clem, isn't it? You know, you have to be professional. You have to do the right thing. You know, as far as your employer is concerned, you have to be prepared for absolutely anything that might crop during the course of a live program. But of course, some of it, hopefully, comes down to personality as well. And I'm lucky that I've had, well, in particular, one employer in Sky that has let me express myself, that hasn't had me in a straight jacket, you know, that doesn't insist that I follow the company line all the time, that just allows me, you know, to be more myself. You're never quite yourself, are you? But be more myself on TV. So I think it's a balancing act. You know, you don't want to be too self-indulgent, although if you ever see the shows I do, you'll know that I am pretty self-indulgent at times. Yeah, a balancing act between the two, I would say, Clem.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of begs the question whether your career has been a happy accident or whether it was by design.
Yeah, and I'm going to say a bit of both again.
Thank you.
I always wanted to be a journalist, you know, principally. So that part of my career, because I am by profession a journalist, you know, it says in my passport, journalist, that sort of thing. So that was by design. I knew from the early days when I was in the sixth form at school and things, but before that, in fact, that I wanted to work in newspapers. And of course, broadcasting was very sort of embryonic business at the time. Never crossed my mind that I might go into radio and TV. But once I made the first step into radio, I knew I loved that then. So consequently, you know, that was the design part of it. But accident, of course, because you need to be in the right place at the right time. You need to have a lot of luck. You know, I turned down my first opportunity to go to London for work, you know, because frankly, I just moved into a lovely house on Teesside that overlooked the golf course. It had two toilets, an upstairs and downstairs toilet. And I wasn't going to give all that up. So I turned down an opportunity in London. But the guy who took the job decided after 6 months it wasn't for him. So the company, LBC IRN, rang me back and said, have you had a change of heart? And I said, yes, I have had a change of heart. So, you know, by design and partly by accident.
But do you think If you'd stayed on the Hartlepool Mail, where you, I think I'm right in saying, started, unless there was something I don't know about before that, do you think, bearing in mind where your headset was at the start, if you'd had a 25, 30-year career as the writer on Hartlepool United, do you think that might have been enough for you?
I don't think anybody could take 25 years reporting on Hartlepool United. That would lead to all sorts of mental issues. I'm absolutely certain. Maybe. I know people. Obviously, I've got friends in the Northeast who spent their entire life working either on a local newspaper or within regional TV, for example, and they're fabulously happy. They've had great lives and great careers and are local personalities, and that's fantastic. There was never, when you talked by design or accident, there was never a master plan to go off and try and present national TV and do the same show for goodness knows how long. I'm sure I would have been perfectly happy. The Hartlepool Mail was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I'm sure I'd have been perfectly happy staying there. I wasn't driven at the time, and I didn't realise I was. I wouldn't have turned the London job down first time. So yeah, it's perfectly possible I'd have been, extremely happy, just as I have been, doing what I'm doing.
So we go local newspaper, local radio. We head down to London, and then we start working through various broadcasting jobs. You had a little spell, I think, with the BBC as well, didn't you? Sport on 2, as it was. It's now BBC Radio 5 Live. What was the budge into Sky? How did that come about?
Well, a couple of things. I did work at what was the equivalent of 5 Live now. I mean, it was Radio 2 then. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to work with fantastic, in my view, legendary broadcasters. People like Brian Butler, for example, who we worked with. All sorts of Peter Jones. Obviously, it was always Peter Jones and Brian Butler who did the football. Peter Bromley, the horse racing correspondent, and in years, John Inverdale was there at the same time as I was. There were lots of real quality broadcasters there. And although things had gone really well, and I'd been to a couple of Olympic Games and goodness knows what, my aim was to present the flagship show there, which was, the Saturday afternoon, as it was then, Sport on 2 show. And my boss didn't quite see it in the same way. She thought some young whippersnapper called Inverdale was a far better bet. And of course, in retrospect, she turned out to be not so far wrong, because he's a wonderful broadcaster. He's a good mate of mine as well. But that made me wonder about my future there. And I got a chance to go into TV, and eventually that was the old TV AM, which has become GMTV effectively. It was an 18-month nightmare, another story. And I had to get out. Of there. And eventually I got an introduction to the man who would become my boss for 30 years, Vic Wakeling, who was then at the old BSB, the Square Eel. People remember the Square Eels?
Yeah.
Nobody ever saw, It's like seeing a man from outer space. If you saw a Square Eel, there were nowhere, because we didn't sell any, because nobody was watching. Anyway, I met Vic Wakeling there. He was head of sport there. He moved on to Sky, and eventually, to cut a long story short, I moved with him. And that was more than 25 years ago now.
Wow. Do you mind if I ask you, because there'll be a lot of students watching this who are maybe at the early stages of their careers, when you didn't get a job that you very much wanted, one of the lessons we try and help with is getting around the roadblocks. Do you remember how you felt? Do you remember how you sort of managed your own emotional state? Do you remember how you developed your levels of resistance to be able to get round a hurdle like that?
Well, one thing I found was that I was always aware that though I was disappointed, that I was working with brilliant people and I had no divine right to be doing the job that I wanted to do. you know, in my mind, I might have been good enough to do it, but if I wasn't good enough to do it in other people's minds, then that was something I had to accept. And I'm not saying it was easy to accept, but it was made more straightforward by the fact that I still had a wonderful job. It was keeping things in perspective. You know, I was going to Los Angeles and Seoul for Olympic Games. I was going to Helsinki for European Athletics Championships. I was going to, you know, all sorts of major events. So it was still a wonderful job, and I was aware of that. And I'll be honest with you, even though that door was closed to me, and I saw it closed on a long-term basis, in fairness, because Invers, you know, is a fantastic broadcaster, about my age as well. And you know, he was going to be doing that for years to come. There's no question in my mind. But I didn't actively really go and look for another job because I was still pretty happy with my lot. It was just that when another job opportunity came along, the fact that that closed door was still in my mind influenced me to make the move. You know, if I'd have been presenting, you know, Sport on 2 as it was then, at that time, when the chance to come on to TV arrived, to move to TV, I would never have taken it, never have moved. But as I say, in the back of my mind, there was always the question, would I ever get the chance to do what I wanted to do at the BBC? The answer to me was no. I've got a great job, but here's an opportunity to move in a different direction where maybe there wasn't a roadblock.
I mean, if we think back to, it was 94, wasn't it, when Sport Saturday, as it was then called, started. It since became Gillette Soccer Saturday. I mean, Jeff, there was nothing like it in the UK. You know, I'd seen the format in Italy in the late 80s, I think, early 90s, but the notion of a few ex-pros sitting around watching TV screens and then describing what they could see was just something completely new to the UK. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of a forerunner to Gogglebox, if you want to call it now, isn't it? You know, people sitting watching, you know, TV and describing what they're seeing, and everyone was cynical, everyone was skeptical. You know, me included, really, about how well it could possibly work. And I remember in the early days, you know, it was a very different beast to the one that it is now. You know, it has developed over the years. In the early days, you know, we didn't have reporters at football grounds. We didn't even allow the panel to stay in the studio where I was once 3 o'clock had come. You know, so it has gradually, it's gradually changed. But there was no, you know, when my boss suggested this sort of show to me, I mean, there wasn't a queue around the office of people wanting to present it. But again, I thought, well, this is an opportunity, you know, it's an opportunity, you know. And hey, if it had failed, that hopefully be something I've always thought. If it had failed, there'd have been another opportunity somewhere further down the line. And I've tried to think that. I think, Clem, throughout my career, you know, I've always thought that, you know, from applying for jobs from the Northeast to try and get into bigger radio stations, for example, you know, you take the knockbacks, you take the rejections, because you always think, well, there's another opportunity coming up somewhere, you know, hopefully relatively soon. And I thought that with Soccer Saturday as well. This was something, you know, that might or might not work. But it wasn't even a risk, you know. It wasn't even a calculated gamble, because there would have been something else, hopefully.
Do you mind if I take you into the mechanics of it? Because I'm always fascinated, I'm sure budding broadcasters are, of the preparation that goes in the couple of days building up to it. I'd love for you to describe for us what's behind that desk we see. Just, are you still working paper? Are the electronic screens updating? Are people helping you with some of the lesser tidbits in your ears? Have you got stuff prepared, ready to go when you need it? I mean, paint us a picture, Jeff. Okay.
The situation is this, and you know, obviously, you know, like any other broadcaster, I've got people in my ear, you know, from the producer and the director, and a statistician as well. But the statistician can only tell you certain things. So, like everybody else in broadcasting, you've got your earpiece, you've got people in your ear, your director, your producer, and in this case, I've got a statistician as well. In front of me, I've got a feed, a wires feed, so I get the latest update, news stories. I've got a video printer feed, and I've got another monitor which has various channels, which means that at the touch of a button, basically, I can move between one game and another, probably, generally speaking, only up to about 10 games, something like that. So those are the principal three things: the wires feed for stories, the video printer, and the ability to switch between games. If I hear one of the panel shout, for example, and I know it's Paul Merson, and I know he's watching a game that's on screen number one, so I'll flick straight to that to see if I can see just what has happened. And normally you get some sort of idea. The stats man will provide me with some stats. You ask if it's paper or not. I don't know if you can see any of this, but you ask if it's paper. There are lots of stats that he can't provide me with. For instance, he can't know if somebody has a fullback for Alloa Athletic hasn't scored in 448 career games. He's not going to know, or I'm not going to know that rather, but he will be able to research that and tell me. In front of me, I've got some paper you might be able to see, but I handwrite basically stats about all of the games. This is, that's a championship sheet, which the top game, for instance, will be Bristol City against Swansea City. Just underneath it, I do the bare basics. So I put Ashton Gates, Dean. In the fury of the programme, it's easy to forget the most basic things. So I write the most basic things down. First loss in 11 against Middlesbrough midweek. And I've got their goal scorers. I've got the fact that Famara Jeju hasn't scored this season. Over on the other side, where they're playing Swansea, I've got the last 13 meetings between these two clubs have produced 10 goals, 5-0-0s. That sort of thing. So everything from the most basic stuff through to, well, hopefully slightly more off the wall things. I mean, again, just looking at the game below, for instance, on Saturday, Cardiff Middlesbrough, I just noticed that no Cardiff player had scored more than 12 league goals since 2011. And they've been quite a successful side. And there's a player called Jay Bothroyd, you remember him, got 18 goals that season. But since then, nobody's got more than 12 league goals. So you look for the obvious, you make sure you've got the basics down, but you also look for things that are off the wall. It's computer driven, but it's also, done by hand and done by humans. And it's a combination of everything.
Yeah. But to that end, it means you must have some information that you prepare, but doesn't get used that week. So maybe it then transfers to the notes the following week, because for whatever reason, Shrewsbury don't make the headlines that day. There isn't a goal. There isn't a sending off. There's no reason to go there. So you can carry it over.
Oh, absolutely. I would say that at least 90% of the stats, Clem, don't get used week on week. So they do carry over. I mean, in some cases, one of my pet likes, if you wish, is to find somebody you think should score a goal from time to time, but doesn't. I remember there's a boy who was at Chelsea in his early days called Josh McEachran, and he moved to Brentford. And I noticed he hadn't scored in 120 games. And he's a midfield player, not even a holding midfield player. And I thought that was an unusual little oddity. I thought he's bound to score soon. And he'd scored for, I think, the under-21s and things like that. And he'd also scored a cup goal, but never a league goal. So week after week, was never used. So I'd religiously updated, not scored in 121, 122, 152, 172, 173. And so it went on, because I knew that one day he would score that goal. And I would be able to say triumphantly, there's Josh McEachran, his first goal, at the 198th time of asking. So you do. Now, there is a little punchline to that, of course, which is I don't always do the midweek shows. And one midweek show when Brentford were playing, Josh McEachran took a free kick. He completely mishit the thing. It was meant to be a centre. Went straight to the top corner of the goal. And I was unable to say Josh McEachran, his first goal in 199 appearances. And I was gutted. I was at home. I remember it well. I was at home. Julian Warren was presenting, and I am shouting at the TV screen, "No, no!" Anyway, yeah. So yeah, a lot of the information you can carry over week after week, and if people who watch Soccer Saturday, which obviously is the main show that I do, will know that, for instance, some of the lines, some of the bad gags, for example, will appear on more than one occasion, or more than two occasions, in fact. So yeah, but it's sadly, I find it a lot of fun doing the prep, and uncovering little unusual lines.
Well, yeah. Well, that's an important distinction, isn't it? Because I suppose it could become a little bit of a drag. Listen, what's the secret to your own longevity? How have you reinvented yourself? And also, your relationship with key personnel must change from being maybe the junior presenter to more experienced producers to now you're this iconic figurehead of the program, and you will have up and coming producers coming in. So I guess you have to change your relationship, make sure you respect the fact they can invigorate you a little bit, bringing new things to the table. There's a lot of questions in there, but you get the essence of what I'm asking you.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm lucky enough in that certainly for the past 10 years, maybe more, Sky has seen Soccer Saturday as, one of their flagship, if not their flagship program, their flagship football program. So the producers have all been experienced senior people themselves. So rarely had to work with young, inexperienced producers there. On live football, I mean, I did Champions League for 5 years, and I've done, the League Cup in its various different forms, or it be Carabao Cup or whatever. You had a different variety of producers to work with on those occasions. But look, it's a team game. At the end of the day, it's a team game, and what he says is just as important as what I say. We have open, frank discussions, but some of the other key players are assistant producers who maybe they may be very young and inexperienced, but the pieces of VT they cut, for example, you can live or die by some of those. If they cut the wrong thing, something you're not expecting to see, it can put you in a really, really tricky position. So I mean, obviously you try to go through all that stuff beforehand, but in these COVID-19 affected days, it's very difficult because a lot of the material is cut remotely. They're doing it from their homes effectively, so it makes the checks a bit more difficult. But relationship with people, I hope the team would tell you that over the years, I don't think I've changed much. I still like to go for a beer with whoever's the most junior member of the team. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter to me. And his opinion on football, or her opinion on football, will be just as valid, as mine. I mean, we won't agree over everything, of course we won't, because we're football fans. But I've always thought of myself, this is going to sound, I don't want this to sound condescending, I've always thought of myself as just a member of the team. And I'm the lucky one, who gets most of the glory at the end of the day, But I mean, if you look at sort of a football analogy, I mean, the right back, or the holding midfield player, they don't get the credit that the striker gets, but without them, there wouldn't be a team, there wouldn't be a result, there wouldn't be an end product. So, and I think it's similar with us. And I've been lucky as well, because over the years, my relationship with people on the panel, has always been good. We've had, some wonderfully affable people, people like Frank McClintock and, the spiky Rodney Marsh and more recently Phil Thompson and Charlie Nicholas, Paul Merson. you know, again, they've all been great team players. And we have had panelists, by the way, come in and because of character clashes, not necessarily with me, but with other panelists, you know, they've been there for 2 or 3 weeks and they've gone because you have to have a relationship with the people you're working with. I guess that goes in any walk of life. And yeah, we've always had pretty good relationships within the background team and within the panel in front of the camera.
From a personal point of view, do you ever have a bad day, and how do you reflect upon it? Maybe a day when you've made a couple of mistakes. So do you beat yourself up as you drive home? Are you grumpy for the next 48 hours? How do you process it?
Well, my wife and kids would tell you I'm grumpy for more than the next 48 hours. In fact, they would just tell you I'm permanently grumpy because once one show's gone, there's another one coming up. Yeah, I do. You try your best to shrug it off. It depends how significant the mistake has been, obviously. You know, if it's a few stumbles over words, I mean, I think recently, for example, I saw a clip of Lyle Taylor who's at Nottingham Forest come on, and his hair was shocking pink. And I made some sort of throwaway comment about how terrible his hair looked and so on. And it wasn't until a couple of minutes later that my producer said, it's October. For the last 3 years, he's dyed his hair pink to raise awareness of breast cancer. Oh. And I thought, oh my God. You know, so I beat myself up over that for a while. And to try and compensate, I came in with a pink wig the following week, you know, and referred back to the mistake I'd made. Because one thing I found, Clemmit, in TV terms is if people will say, you know, don't admit your mistakes, don't refer back to your mistakes because it's gone. Well, I don't believe in that. I think if you've made a mistake, put your hands up and say, yeah, I got that wrong. Sorry about that. You know, now we move on. Or in the case of Lyle Taylor, try and do something to rectify it. But yes, mistakes hurt. You know when you've had a bad show. There's no doubt about it. You know when you've had a good show. The big thing is you know, you just got to try and you do have to try and put it behind you. It doesn't matter how grumpy and how much you live with. You probably try extra hard the next week. I mean, you really do. You probably try extra hard to get things right the following week. So that's sort of basically how I approach it.
Are you shocked that a football show could have made household names out of yourself? Obviously, at one stage you went off to do Countdown. You had another ITV series, and also Cammy as well. You know, Unbelievable Jeff, and that sacred mistake with the Anthony Van Den Boer sending off. It's kind of propelled you into a world where I would suggest a big proportion of the population know who the pair of you are.
It is bewildering in a way. You know, because as I said, when we look back to the start of this show, I don't think anybody had huge expectations about it. You know, that here we are 25 years later and we'd still be flourishing. And when you make changes to the panel, for example, it would make, you know, the national newspapers, and there'd be a flurry of stuff on social media. And coming after the Anthony Van Den Boer incident, for example, he got a call from, you know, an Australian TV station asking for, you know, his reaction on that. I mean, recently, for a completely different reason, I was talking to a huge football agent in the States, a massive football agent, was involved in the Fenway Group's takeover of Liverpool. And I introduced myself to him, and he said, "You don't need to tell me who you are, Jeff." He said, "We know who you are." Yeah. And on the back of all of this stuff, I mean, I do pieces for American radio stations, you know, within their football shows. And it is pretty mind-blowing, to be absolutely honest. You know, the people outside of this country, let alone inside this country, would have come to know me and Cammy, and, you know, like people like Bianca Westwood as well, who's made a real name for herself as one of the first women reporters, you know. Yeah, you know, you have to pinch yourself sometimes. I'd like to think, Clemmit, I would enjoy things just as much, you know, if we didn't have that sort of, you know, celebrity, because of the sort of show that it is, and because of the fact it's a fun job to do, and there aren't many people, to be honest, who can say that, you know, in life. My dad worked at the steelworks, you know, and I used to see him come home from a 6 till 2 shift, wheeling his bike, covered in all sorts of stuff. And we would talk about my future, and he would say, son, I don't mind what you do, as long as you don't do what I've been doing for the last 25 years and working in that bloody steelworks. You know, so times when I get angry with myself and want to beat myself up and get grumpy over a bad show, you know, or maybe a bad piece of press, something like that, then I try and think back, you know, what my old man used to have to do day in, day out, all of his working life, you know. So, you know, some of us got lucky along the way.
Come on, what have been the fundamentals? How have you been able to have such a long, particularly broadcast career at a time when, let's be honest, middle-aged white blokes are being dispensed of in other organisations? What are the fundamental values, beliefs, things that have underpinned your career, Jeff?
The thing always that everybody is, you know, we talked about it before, the most crucial thing in any job is preparation. You know, however much preparation done, you think, okay, I'm finished, I've done. You know, if you've got another half an hour, do another half an hour. You know, and I've always tried to be prepared for, whether it was live football, you know, or whether it's soccer Saturday, I've always tried to be prepared for every possible thing that could happen during the course of a live broadcast. Relationships are important as well. Relationships, as we talked about, with a team around you, no matter whether they're the most junior member of the team or not. You have to have everybody pulling for you and pulling for your program. And outside of the TV station, relationships with other people, in my case, people within football, whether it be a manager or a player, you know, to treat them as you would want to be treated, you know, to not just see them as a manager or a player, but as a human being as well. I think that's been important over the years. And you need to have two other things. You know, you need to have a lot of luck. I mean, a lot of luck. When I first started, when I left, for example, the old TV AM and went to the Squarial people, I went as a reporter. And there were 3 main presenters at the time. And just a couple of weeks before I got there, my soon-to-be boss rang me and said, "I've just looked at your show reel again." I said, he said, "You'll be wasted as a reporter. I want you to present." And I said, "Okay, Vic." I said, "Who's dropped out?" And he told me, Steve Scott, whose name you'll know, Steve Scott, had dropped out. He was going to be one of their main presenters. And because he dropped out at the last minute, I got that job, and it changed my life, you know, really. So you need a lot of luck along the way. And I've had it in spadefuls. And you need somebody to have faith in you. And in my case, I was lucky enough to have Vic Wakeling, who passed away a couple of years ago, who was head of Sky Sports, managing director of Sky Sports for, you know, virtually all of my time there. And he had belief and faith in me. He would always say to me, you know, because obviously apart from football, I did things like horse racing, snooker, darts, greyhound racing. And he always said to me, any working class sport, Jeff, you're doing it. So, it was a backhanded compliment in a way, but he stood by me even in really difficult times. And so, without him, I'd probably been out of the door many years ago. So there are a lot of things that you need to have the sort of longevity, and honestly, I'm lucky as well, Clem, good health. That's the other thing, I think I've missed one Saturday when there's been a full program, not international weekends, one Saturday in 25 years. So,
wow,
a lot of things on my side.
Would you like to be starting off now? It's a vastly different world, isn't it? I mean, opportunities in new areas and new ways of delivery, but old school sort of grounding areas like local newspapers, local radio, not providing the opportunities that once were. So are we in better times now, or are we in worse times?
We're just in different times, aren't we? That's progress. Would I like to be starting off again now? Well, yes, I would, to be honest. If I knew I was going to have such a good time. And look, when I went into local newspapers, there'd be a huge number of employees there. It was in the days when newspapers were still printed. There was still the hot metal presses running, within the building that I worked in. And it was a fantastic, buzzy atmosphere. You went to local radio, and I worked with some fantastic, in my first local radio station, I went to work with so many people who went on to work with national TV. I think Mark Mardell's still, like the US correspondent for BBC TV. A lot of it went on to work for Radio 4. And it was a big newsroom, sports department, probably 20 people. And now, of course, those opportunities are gone, because most newsrooms would be 2-3 people, maybe at the most. But to counterbalance that, now we've got all the digital opportunities, that we didn't have before. So one door's closed, but another door has opened, and it would be great. I mean, when I'm reading, any X, Y, or Z website, I mean, let's say skysports.com, because it's what I work for, and I read the running reports of Arsenal against Manchester United, and I think what a great job that kid's got. Who's doing that now. It's something that I could never have dreamt about when I was younger. So now that's a real avenue of opportunity for people like that. And the way I look at it, Clem, is it's the business is different now, but it's still a fantastic business to be involved in. I would encourage my kids to be involved in it if they can get the foot in the door, because it's just a wonderful way of life. Whether it be doing the sort of thing that I'm doing, presenting, whether you're behind the scenes, and whether it's sport or news or documentary making, there are so many fantastic sort of strands to it that you can get involved in.
What does the future hold, Jeff?
Well, for me, it probably not a long one, I've been around a while, Clem, so I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I don't feel ready to give up yet, that's for sure. Whilst I'm enjoying it, I want to go on until somebody tells me that they are not enjoying what I do. So at the moment, again, I've got the backing of my Sky bosses. They've sort of made it pretty clear that when my time at Sky ends, it'll be my decision. That's what I've been told. So I hope I know when the right time is, Clem. I hope I know that, even though I write it down, when I can't remember that Bristol City play at Ashton Gate or that Dean Holden is their manager, when I can't remember that, then I know the time is getting pretty close. So touch wood, I can still remember it.
Well, listen, let's rejoice. Jeff, thanks for all those brilliant hours of entertainment you've given us, and it goes without saying, thanks for sharing your experiences. It's been absolutely fascinating. Really appreciate you joining us.
No, Clemmit, a pleasure as ever, mate. Nice to speak to you again.
I'm Mark Clemmit. Thanks for watching. Hope you can join us again soon with another one from our Global Insight series.